former president, a seated king, and a royal guard who moved only once, but froze the entire room. When world leaders gathered inside Windsor Palace for a global unity summit, the tension wasn't in the speeches, it was in the silence. Trump, restless and off-script, rose mid-session to interrupt Barack Obama, just as the former president began answering a critical question on global restraint. The palace staff braced, the microphones flickered, the moment teetered, and that's when it happened. A single royal guard stepped between them. No words, no warning, just perfect stillness in front of power. Trump halted mid-stride. The king said nothing, and for a full 10 seconds, Windsor went silent, frozen by one man who didn't speak, but still commanded the floor. Now, before we show you how that moment made headlines around the world, the guard's personal history, and the quiet reaction from King Charles himself, drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on, and stay right, because this is one royal guard story they'll never put in the official transcripts. The sun had not yet broken fully through the mist when the first motorcade curved through the iron gates of Windsor Palace. A faint chill lingered above the cobbled drive, curling around the wheels of security vans and black diplomatic sedans. Inside the grand ballroom, staff moved in controlled choreography, adjusting drapes, aligning chairs, checking sound channels without a word too many spoken. The chandeliers had already been lit. Golden glass shimmered above the long polished table that ran the centre of the room, flanked by tall backed chairs embroidered with the royal crest. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something softer, citrus maybe, from the freshly pressed linen on the tables. Outside, the Union Jack stirred faintly in the breeze. Today was not just ceremony, it was optics. The summit had been framed as a dialogue of global continuity, carefully worded to imply neither allegiance nor opposition, a neutral gathering. But everyone knew what it really was, a test of presence, who still mattered, who still commanded a room. And that room was filling quickly. The first rows filled with European ministers, former heads of state, and quietly aging monarchs. The second with aides, analysts, and select journalists. And at the top, seated beneath the elevated gold crest of the House of Windsor, King Charles and Queen Camilla took their place at the central dais, flanked by chamberlains and protocol staff. Near the rear entrance, just behind the arch where tapestries hung heavy with age and velvet, stood the palace ceremonial post, a single Coldstream Guard in full uniform. Colour Sergeant Thomas Avery, still, composed, not watching, observing. His tall, solid black bearskin hat cast a shadow across the bridge of his nose, the brass detailing on his red tunic catching only the edge of morning light. One gloved hand rested gently atop the hilt of his ceremonial sword, the other behind his back. He had not been stationed here by accident. At precisely 09:42, the side entrance opened again, not with fanfare, but with friction. A black American SUV pulled to a halt in the courtyard, doors clicking open in sync. Donald Trump entered the ballroom like he'd been waiting for it all to begin without him. Blue tie, navy suit, chin lifted slightly higher than natural. Behind him, two aides kept pace, one already scanning the room for cameras. Trump's eyes skimmed the layout. He didn't pause to admire the chandeliers or the vaulted ceilings. His gaze moved to the central chairs, then to the man already seated. Barack Obama was in quiet conversation with the Italian president, one ankle resting over the other, posture relaxed but alert. He wore a dark suit with a lapel pin barely visible. No fanfare, only presence. Trump didn't greet him, didn't nod, just moved toward his assigned seat, which had been placed 3 chairs down, not out of disrespect, but alphabetical protocol. His face tightened slightly at the distance. One of the aides leaned toward him. "We can request a swap if you'd like." Trump shook his head, waving it off. Let him have his moment. Obama, if he noticed the remark, gave no sign. He continued his conversation, eyes never flinching from the person across from him. The microphones clicked on. The moderator, a senior British diplomat with a voice like sanded oak, welcomed the guests and outlined the structure, open questions from European press, followed by shared remarks from former and current leaders. The camera operators adjusted their lenses. A soft hum of translation earpieces rippled down the row. And still, Sergeant Avery stood unmoving. His post was beneath the far archway, neither front nor back, but aligned exactly where protocol placed ceremonial presence between ambition and authority. He did not know what would unfold today, only that something was already out of alignment. And when that misalignment crossed into movement, he would move, but not before, never before. The first round of questions moved smoothly, the tone courteous, the content predictable. A German delegate asked about post-conflict trade stability. An Italian representative inquired about cooperative green energy initiative. Obama answered with practiced calm, weaving optimism into restraint. His cadence was slow, deliberate, refined by years of walking the tightrope between leadership and legacy. Trump sat forward in his chair, legs apart, shoulders back, a pose he often defaulted to when cameras were near. He adjusted his cuff twice, leaned toward one of his aides and muttered, "They're just teeing him up for applause." The aide responded softly, "You'll have your turn, sir." But Trump wasn't listening. His gaze remained locked on Obama, whose latest reply had touched on the role of collective discipline in global alliances. "Discipline," Trump echoed under his breath, scoffing, "That's rich." The ballroom, meanwhile, responded with quiet appreciation. Subtle nods from French and Nordic representatives, a faint smile from King Charles, who watched the dialogue from the elevated dais. Trump's fingers tapped the lacquered table edge. His foot began to bounce. Then came a question from a British journalist, piercing and pointed. To both former presidents, how should a divided world respond to provocations that seek to erode diplomatic cooperation? Obama leaned forward gently, signaling to take it first. He folded his hands lightly. "Well," he began, "I think the answer doesn't begin with power. It begins with patience, the strength to absorb, interpret, and respond, without defaulting to spectacle. The world's not lacking in might. It's lacking in stillness. Stillness is a form of strength." That was the moment it happened. Trump exhaled loudly. His chair scraped back an inch. He rose, not with dramatic speed, but with intention, like a man stepping into a room that had gone on without him. He adjusted his jacket, looked toward the stage. Obama's sentence continued, "When we choose stillness over reaction," but Trump was already walking. First 3 steps forward, then a slight pivot, his hand raised in a half gesture toward the moderator's desk. One of the sound engineers glanced nervously at the mic system. Aides shifted, journalists whispered. The king leaned slightly forward on his throne. The queen blinked once, slowly. Trump didn't speak yet, but his posture said everything. "I've heard enough." And that's when the tension crystallized, not because of what Trump said, but because of what he was about to do. He was going to interrupt, live, on palace grounds, in front of royals, global press, and international heads of state. He raised his hand slightly higher, and a quiet signal from the moderator suggested someone had cued the override on the mic, and then a single step echoed from the far arch, polished leather striking marble, deliberate. Colour Sergeant Avery moved. He didn't speak, he didn't point, he didn't threaten, he simply walked, one clean step forward, then another. Not fast, not aggressive, just precise. Within seconds, he placed himself squarely between Trump and the stage. Back straight, arms still, face expressionless, a ceremonial wall, a red-coated, black-hatted refusal. The room froze. Even the lights felt still. Trump paused mid-gesture, looked at him, looked past him, said nothing, but blinked twice. Obama sat quietly behind, hands folded. In that breathless silence, no command was issued, because one had already been obeyed, the command of order, of protocol, of stillness. Sergeant Avery didn't move like a man reacting to a crisis. He moved like a man fulfilling a choreography older than the guests in the room. Every motion was contained, efficient, boots gliding across the marble, not stomping, arms rigid but not locked. His ceremonial bearskin hat added gravity to his height, but it was the look in his eyes, calm, focused, detached, that made the moment immovable. Trump, caught mid-stride, stopped a single pace before him. For a beat, neither man spoke. To those watching from the sidelines, from behind gilded pillars or camera tripods, the confrontation was almost surreal. Here was a man who had commanded nuclear briefcases, a man known for dominating stages, rallies, headlines, And yet now, in this room of velvet curtains and monarchical quiet, he stood paused by a guard who didn't even draw breath in his direction. The audience didn't gasp. They didn't need to. The silence was the gasp. One of Trump's aides half rose from his seat. The other whispered rapidly into a comm piece. But no one approached, because once a royal guard enters the floor at Windsor, protocol speaks louder than politics. Trump narrowed his eyes, studying Avery like he was trying to recognize rank or weakness. But Avery didn't blink, didn't flinch. He didn't need to threaten. His existence was the refusal. A mic technician stood frozen near the audio panel. One of the moderators leaned toward her. "Cancel the override." She nodded silently, her fingers trembling slightly. The king remained seated, back straight, fingers steepled before him. He didn't look angry. He looked observant. The Queen whispered something, her tone unreadable. And Obama, still seated behind the long desk, simply waited. His expression hadn't changed. Not smug, not surprised, just still. A single camera flash broke the air, then another. Photographers had caught it. Trump and the guard, face to face, locked in unspeaking refusal. Trump's jaw shifted. He muttered almost to himself, "You're seriously doing this?" Avery didn't respond, didn't move, just stood. Trump stepped slightly to the side. Avery mirrored him. Another step, another block. It wasn't aggressive. It was mathematical. Trump turned his head toward the dais. "Charles?" he called out, low but audible. No response. The king remained seated, unmoving, a portrait of his own legacy. He did not command the guard to move. He did not ask Trump to stop. He simply let the silence judge what the crown no longer needed to explain. Trump scoffed softly and lowered his hand. Then, very deliberately, he turned away. The tension didn't break so much as exhale. Sergeant Avery stepped precisely back to his original position by the arch. The line he'd drawn, invisible, undeniable, remained. Trump returned to his seat. The leather creaked slightly as he sat, arms folding tighter than before. He adjusted his tie once, glared briefly at the table, and said nothing. The moderator hesitated, unsure if it was safe to resume, until Obama spoke. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just clearly. "There are moments," he said, eyes gently scanning the room, "when the only answer is to stand still." A few chuckles rippled, but they were quiet, respectful. The line wasn't a dig. It was a diagnosis, and so the dialogue continued, but something had shifted. A guard had drawn a line with his presence. And a president, one who once crossed borders and headlines like they were his playground, had been stopped by it, not violently, not shamefully, but entirely. And the ballroom, once brimming with political tension, had turned still, not out of fear, but out of respect. Trump leaned slightly back in his chair, but not in relaxation. In calculation. His arms crossed, jaw tense, one foot bouncing faintly beneath the table. He didn't speak, but the message in his posture was clear. This wasn't over. The guard's presence had ended the forward motion, but not the ego behind it. Obama, meanwhile, resumed his reply without a hint of triumph. His tone remained measured, words weaving diplomacy with reflection. "We don't unify through dominance," he said. "We unify through shared restraint. The discipline to allow another voice to be heard, even when we disagree with it, is the foundation of any enduring alliance." Applause followed, short, tasteful, but unmistakable. The Queen joined with a soft clap. The King nodded once. Trump didn't move. He waited, calculated, watched the room. Then, after the next question was fielded to the Polish delegation, he leaned over to his aide and spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. "This is a setup. You saw what he did. Walked in here like he's still in charge. And now I'm the one who's out of line." His aide hesitated. "Sir, the guard didn't act politically. It's protocol." "Protocol?" Trump scoffed. "That was a message. That was them telling me who they think still runs the show." Before the aide could respond, another figure quietly stepped up beside Trump's seat. Tall, white-haired, crisp suit, Lord Chamberlain Alistair Hemming, Master of Ceremonies for Royal Functions. His voice, when he spoke, was low and toneless, polished smooth by decades of navigating egos. "Mr. President," he said with a faint bow, "may I offer a clarification?" Trump turned to him stiffly. By all means. The guard's intervention was not commentary. It was calibration. In this room, sequence is enforced to the letter, speaker by speaker, seat by seat. Trump raised an eyebrow. So what? I don't get to respond? In due time, Hemming replied. When the floor reaches you. Trump chuckled darkly. The floor? What is this? Theatre? The Chamberlain didn't react. It's a ballroom, sir. Theatre is in Covent Garden. Trump smirked. Cute. Behind him, Obama continued, his voice barely rising, but his presence doing all the work. The Chamberlain took one half-step closer. May I remind you, sir, that interrupting a speaker on royal grounds is not merely a breach of courtesy, it is an infraction of ceremonial order. Trump leaned in. And what happens if someone breaks your precious order? The Chamberlain didn't blink. Then someone enforces it. Trump exhaled, irritated. Right, like that guy with the bearskin hat. That gentleman, Hemming said, is Colour Sergeant Thomas Avery. He holds a Royal Victorian Medal and served in Afghanistan. He does not move without purpose. Trump said nothing, just looked down for a moment, adjusting his cuff again. A rare moment of internal pause. Sir, the aide whispered again, voice more urgent now. You're being filmed from 7 angles. Every network's got eyes. If you escalate this... I'm not escalating, Trump said. Too loud. I'm correcting. And again the motion began, just a shift in posture, a tightening of the shoulders. But this time, the voice that cut in didn't come from beside him. It came from above. Mr. Trump. It was the king. The room froze. King Charles hadn't raised his voice, but he didn't need to. The way he sat, hands folded on the armrest, expression cool, sovereign, was enough to arrest the entire corridor of attention. We value every voice present today, the king said, tone formal but edged, but we must insist those voices speak in turn. Trump looked up, surprised. For a moment, he seemed ready to respond, but then he saw the Queen watching him, lips pursed in ceremonial neutrality, and then Sergeant Avery, now returned to his place under the arch, standing precisely as he had been before, as if the disruption had never occurred. Trump's face stiffened, then relaxed, slightly. He nodded once. Fine, he muttered. He didn't rise again, not yet. Obama, without missing a beat, responded to the next question, on diplomatic patience in a multipolar world. There's strength in waiting your turn, he said quietly. The hardest thing for any powerful person to do is listen. Laughter. Real this time. But not at Trump's expense, at the truth of it. And behind it all, the guard stood motionless once again. Not triumphant, not gloating, just still. Because stillness wasn't weakness. It was enforcement, of order, of memory, of who the room actually belonged to. The summit ended just before dusk. The final remarks were polite, measured, ceremonial. The kind of language designed not to linger, diplomatic but weightless, dissolving like sugar in tea. The guests filed out in slow order. Delegates shook hands with staffers. Journalists packed up quietly, glancing over their shoulders to catch final shots of the throne. Aides whispered names to drivers waiting outside the East Wing. But behind the heavy doors of the grand ballroom, the real echo still hung in the air. Not from words spoken, but from the moment they hadn't been. From the interruption that didn't happen. Trump left through the side corridor, surrounded by aides, his coat folded over one arm, voice low but clipped. They think this is still the empire, he muttered. It's a museum with a crown. Nobody replied. They passed a footman holding open a tall brass-framed door. The aide nodded in thanks. Trump didn't. Elsewhere, on the west balcony above the gardens, Obama stood beside King Charles. The view was darkening now. Hedges vanishing into fog, lamps glowing faintly along the gravel paths. I've seen power misused, Obama said, but I've rarely seen it ignored so quietly. The king gave a faint smile. That's the advantage of silence. It doesn't escalate, he paused, but it does expose. Neither man looked back at the ballroom. Down a narrower hall, away from the marble and photographers, a door stood half open near the security annex. Inside, Sergeant Thomas Avery removed his bearskin hat and set it gently on the oak shelf. He unfastened one white glove, then the other, placing them in the same drawer as his polish cloth. He did it all without ceremony, like someone folding away a uniform after a funeral, Another guard entered, younger, posture too rigid. "Sir," he said. "Was that planned?" Avery turned. His expression was unreadable. "What?" "What you did, stepping in." Avery met the young man's eyes for the first time. "No, it wasn't planned. It was required." "But—" The junior guard hesitated. "He's a former president." Avery nodded once. "And I'm a serving guard. That's the point." The younger man looked away, a bit ashamed. "They're saying it's going to be in the papers." "It already is," Avery said, sitting down and unlacing one boot. "But by the time it's printed, it won't be news anymore. It'll be a photograph." The young guard hesitated. "A good one?" Avery looked toward the hallway, where he could just see the flicker of a chandelier, where guests had passed hours earlier without knowing who stood between them and history. He didn't smile. He didn't boast. He simply said, "It's not a question of good, it's a question of whether it meant something." Silence settled again, the kind that fills old halls when the event ends and the walls begin to remember. Outside, in the Queen's private garden, a lone cleaner moved through the stone path with a broom, brushing away petals that had fallen underfoot. No one noticed her. No one photographed her. But in that moment, she was the only person moving, and everyone else was part of the palace's stillness again. In the small press room 2 floors down, a technician played back the summit footage frame by frame. Click, Trump stepping forward. Click, the guard moving. Click, the stare. Click, Trump backing down. Click, Obama speaking again. He paused, looked at the screen, leaned back. "That," he said to no one in particular, "is the moment." He copied the frame, named the file, and saved it. Royal Guard Intervention Windsor 01, JPG. By morning, the image was everywhere. It ran front page across Le Monde, The Times, The Washington Post, and half a dozen digital outlets by sunrise. Not a headline about a summit or a speech. Just a still frame, a royal guard, stone-faced in ceremonial red, standing between Donald Trump and the stage, a line of silence drawn in flesh and fabric. The headlines varied by country. Moment of protocol. The Telegraph, guard silences former president. Der Spiegel, power meets discipline. The New Yorker, he never touched him, but he stopped everything. Al Jazeera, room stood still at Windsor. The independent clips flooded social media. The moment Trump paused, the guard stepped forward, and Obama simply watched, all without a word exchanged. It was dissected frame by frame, audio enhanced, context debated. Hashtags surged. Just Windsor Guard, just royal refusal, just stillness, speaks, Avery line. By mid-morning, press teams reached out from CNN, BBC, even Sky Australia, all asking the same question. Who was the guard? The palace released no official statement, no comment, no correction, just a single email from the press office. The guard was following Royal Order Protocol Section 9C, line interference procedure. There was no deviation. But the media didn't stop there. Veteran forums lit up first. Photos of Colour Sergeant Thomas Avery in Afghanistan surfaced. Years younger, rifle in hand, dust streaked across his brow. His citation for the Royal Victorian Medal appeared next. Then his background, 18 years in the Coldstream Guards, 2 tours present at the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, hand-selected for internal ceremony protection role. Comment sections filled with phrases like, "That man never flinched," "Not in Kabul, not in Windsor." "We train our soldiers to speak, they train theirs to hold the room without a word." He didn't just stop Trump, he reminded the world that there are still lines that can't be crossed. One widely shared clip on YouTube, titled "The Guard Who Outranked Ego," hit 2.3 million views in under 18 hours. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump's camp scrambled to shape the narrative. A senior aide told Fox, "President Trump merely wanted to clarify a point. There was no confrontation. The guard was doing his job, albeit a little theatrically." But that only amplified the contrast. Because theatrics talk, discipline stands still. Obama was asked at a post-summit dinner about the moment. He smiled faintly. "I was more surprised at the silence than the tension. People often assume drama makes history, but it's the restraint that lasts longer." When a journalist followed up, "Did you feel protected?" he replied simply, "I felt the room had its own immune system. A guard doesn't protect just people. He protects the shape of the room." Inside Windsor's South Administrative Wing, Sergeant Avery sat behind a desk. He had not been pulled from duty. He had not been reprimanded. He had, in fact, been given a new assignment, Station Lead for Royal Threshold Enforcement, a title that meant little outside the palace, but everything inside. He was reviewing clearance rosters when another guard knocked lightly on the door. "Sir, sorry, press outside again." Avery looked up. "They'll get bored. Let them film the gate." The guard hesitated. "Some of them aren't press, just citizens. They brought a wreath." Avery blinked. "A wreath?" "For protocol. Said it wasn't a protest. Just thanks." Avery stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked slowly to the edge of the western portal. From there, he could see them, a modest group of people outside the main fence, silent, holding a white placard with gold lettering. It read, "Some speak to power, some bow to it, and some stand between it, so the room can stay whole." Avery said nothing. He simply returned to his post. Later that evening, as the palace prepared for an internal staff dinner, Queen Camilla, never one to ignore a public stir, made a passing comment to the king in private. All this noise over silence. Charles, without lifting his gaze from the page he was reading, replied, "Because real silence isn't absence, it's intent." And then he closed the book. It was nearly dusk at Windsor again. The ballroom sat empty now, chandeliers dimmed, long table cleared of everything except the faint reflections of earlier tension. The only movement came from a custodian in white gloves, slowly polishing the central crest at the far end of the room. Outside, in the north courtyard, the cold returned. Not bitter, but enough to draw breath from the chest. A single guard stood watch under the arched gallery, his shadow cast long by the flickering torch lamps behind him. Sergeant Thomas Avery, back on duty, same uniform. Same posture, same stillness. The pageantry had passed, the cameras had moved on, but the room, the corridor, the gate, they remembered. From the upper terrace, a lone figure approached. Queen Elizabeth's former lady-in-waiting, now retired from official capacity, but still known across the palace grounds for her quiet authority. She walked with a cane, but her voice remained sharp. She paused at Avery's post. "You're the one from the summit, aren't you?" He nodded once. "Ma'am." She looked past him to the dark windows of the ballroom. "They won't forget it, you know. Not the papers, the room." Avery didn't speak. She gave a soft laugh. "There's something oddly British about it, really. A man stands still, and the entire world moves around him." He didn't move. She stepped back with a smile, tapping her cane. "Good. Don't." And then she disappeared down the stone hallway, her footsteps echoing between the columns like punctuation marks in fading light. Avery remained, his breath faint in the air, eyes steady. Behind him, the ballroom slept again, and the guard, the man who never said a word, had somehow said everything. Do you think the guard was right to step in that day? Was it necessary protocol, or a quiet message to someone who stepped out of line? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. We're reading every single one. If you believe tradition matters, and discipline still has a place in the modern world, tap that like button, subscribe, and press the bell icon so you never miss a new Royal Guard story. And if someone you know still remembers a time when silence held more weight than speeches, share this video with them right now. One of our best Royal Guard stories is now appearing on screen. Go watch that next, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, right here.